Rear Admiral Isaac C. Kidd, Cleveland, Ohio. Quote, for conspicuous devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and complete disregard of his own life during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor territory of Hawaii by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. He immediately went to the bridge and as Commander Battleship Division 1, courageously discharged his duties as senior officer present afloat until the USS Arizona, his flagship, blew up from magazine explosions and a direct bomb hit on the bridge, which resulted in the loss of his life. End quote. Now, senior officer present afloat means what it says. Admiral Kidd was the commander of the battleship squadron, but since nobody was present in the harbor who outranked him, that means he was technically in command of the entire fleet throughout the attack up until the moment he got killed. And if you're wondering about the scene from the Pearl Harbor movie where Admiral Kimmel is on the golf course, Admiral Kimmel, who of course was Commander Pacific Fleet, that's kind of half true and half Hollywood embellishment. He did have a tea time scheduled for 8 o'clock that morning, but he wasn't actually out on the course yet. He had arrived at the clubhouse and was informed of the attack before he even had a chance to put his spikes on, really. And I like to imagine the telling went something like this. Sorry, sir, your round of golf has been canceled by order of Admiral Yamamoto. And here is another thing I will say for our boys on that day. We may have got caught with our ass hanging out. It may have wound up being a tactical blunder that we had all of our ships and airplanes bunched together because we wanted to guard against sabotage. But setting that aside for just a moment, when the bombs started falling at 7:48, the clock had not struck 7:50 by the time our first AA gun was locked and loaded and throwing lead downrange. In fact, Nevada's gunners actually shot down the torpedo bomber that struck her and sent her to the bottom with a torpedo, and that happens less than 3 minutes into the battle. And if we're talking semantics, I think once we have started actively defending ourselves, you have to stop calling it an attack and start calling it a battle. Calling the whole thing an attack, that's kind of a pet peeve of mine. There's about 50 dead Japanese pilots who I suspect would agree with me when I characterize it as a battle. Captain Marvin S. Binion, Vernon, Utah. Quote, for conspicuous devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and complete disregard of his own life above and beyond the call of duty during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. As commanding officer, USS West Virginia, after being mortally wounded, Captain Binion evidenced apparent concern only in fighting and saving his ship and strongly protested against being carried from the bridge. End quote. Now, if you find your thoughts again drifting to the Pearl Harbor movie, here is why. Captain Binion is the guy who was rendered medical aid by Dory Miller, played in the film by Cuba Gooding Jr. Also, here's a fun fact. Dory Miller may not have won the Medal of Honor that day, but he is getting a freaking Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carrier named after him. How awesome is that? And that's something that was portrayed in the film more or less exactly the way it happened. Captain Binion was holding his own guts in with one hand and directing the defense of his ship with the other, which he kept doing until the moment his lifeblood had drained from his body. And then Dory Miller says, I've got some free time now, and that's a nice looking 50 cal over there with nobody operating it. Captain Franklin Van Valkenberg, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Quote, for conspicuous devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and complete disregard of his own life during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor territory of Hawaii by Japanese forces, 7 December 1941. As commanding officer, USS Arizona, Captain Van Valkenberg gallantly fought his ship until the USS Arizona blew up from magazine explosions and a direct bomb hit on the bridge, which resulted in the loss of his life. It's a weird quirk of the Pearl Harbor attack that Arizona wound up suffering the most catastrophic damage since she was moored inboard of USS Vestal and thus she was shielded from a torpedo attack on her broadside. And it's still a matter of some controversy what the chain of events was that led to her magazine exploding and basically breaking her in two. Suffice it to say, some Japanese dive bomber pilot took a 500-pound bomb and hit probably the greatest bullseye in the history of aerial combat. Commander Casson Young, Washington, D.C., quote, for distinguished conduct in action, outstanding heroism, and utter disregard of his own safety, above and beyond the call of duty, as commanding officer USS Vestal, during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor territory of Hawaii by enemy Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. Commander Young proceeded to the bridge and later took personal command of the 3-inch anti-aircraft gun. When blown overboard by the blast of the forward magazine explosion of the USS Arizona, to which the USS Vestal was moored, he swam back to his ship. The entire forward part of the USS Arizona was a blazing inferno with oil afire on the water between the two ships. As a result of several bomb hits, the USS Vestal was afire in several places, was settling and taking on a lift. Despite severe enemy bombing and strafing at the time and his shocking experience of having been blown overboard, Commander Young, with extreme coolness and calmness, moved his ship to an anchorage distant from the USS Arizona and subsequently beached the USS Vestal upon determining that such action was required to save his ship. End quote. See, when the shit first starts hitting the fan, this guy's thinking is pretty simple. I need to raise steam and get my ship out of the way of the Arizona, because then hopefully she can get underway and try to avoid this torpedo attack. But then Arizona's magazine explodes, she breaks in two, and Young's thinking, well, it gets even simpler. I am parked next to a burning vessel that is raining down flaming debris all over my deck, so I need to get the hell out of here, but for an altogether different reason than I was trying to get out of here before. Commander Samuel G. Fuqua, Ladonia, Missouri. Quote, for distinguished conduct in action, outstanding heroism, and utter disregard of his own safety above and beyond the call of duty during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. Upon the commencement of the attack, Lieutenant Commander Fuqua rushed to the quarterdeck of the USS Arizona, to which he was attached, where he was stunned and knocked down by the explosion of a large bomb which hit the quarterdeck, penetrated several decks, and started a severe fire. Upon regaining consciousness, he began to direct the fighting of the fire and the rescue of the wounded and injured personnel. Almost immediately, there was a tremendous explosion forward which made the ship appear to rise out of the water, shudder, and settle down by the bow rapidly. The whole forward part of the ship was enveloped in flames which were spreading rapidly, and wounded and burned men were pouring out of the ship to the quarterdeck. Despite these conditions, his harrowing experience and severe enemy bombing and strafing, at the time, Lieutenant Commander Fuqua continued to direct the fighting of fires in order to check them while the wounded and burned could be taken from the ship, and supervised the rescue of these men in such an amazingly calm and cool manner and with such excellent judgment that it inspired everyone who saw him and undoubtedly resulted in the saving of many lives. After realizing that the ship could not be saved and that he was the senior surviving officer aboard, he directed that it be abandoned, but continued to remain on the quarterdeck and directed abandoning ship and rescue of personnel until satisfied that all personnel that could be had been saved, after which he left the ship with the last boatload. The conduct of Lieutenant Commander Fuqua was not only in keeping with the highest traditions of the naval service, but characterizes him as an outstanding leader of men, end quote. And the citations are starting to speak for themselves now. There's nothing I can add to that one to make it any more badass. The War Department has done all the work for me, but I can report that Commander Fuqua lived to the ripe old age of 87, which I think puts him number 2 on this list in terms of longevity. More on that later. Ensign Francis C. Farity, Charlotte, Michigan. Quote, for conspicuous devotion to duty and extraordinary courage and complete disregard of his own life, above and beyond the call of duty, during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. When it was seen that the USS Oklahoma was going to capsize and the order was given to abandon ship, Ensign Farity remained in a turret holding a flashlight so the remainder of the turret crew could see to escape, thereby sacrificing his own life, end quote. Some of the guys on this list were at their battle stations and performing their assigned duties, but Farity wasn't. He was a guy who happened to have a flashlight. He saw that a gun crew needed help escaping, so he went and helped them escape, and he did it at the cost of his own life. Bear in mind also that this was after the order to abandon ship was given, which means your chain of command ceases to exist, your duty station ceases to exist. It is literally every single man for himself. And this officer, this fresh-faced 22-year-old with his entire life and career ahead of him, he still went to the aid of these enlisted men and sacrificed his own life so they might live. Ensign Herbert C. Jones, Los Angeles, California, quote, for conspicuous devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and complete disregard of his own life above and beyond the call of duty during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. Ensen Jones organized and led a party which was supplying ammunition to the anti-aircraft battery of the USS California after the mechanical hoists were put out of action when he was fatally wounded by a bomb explosion. When 2 men attempted to take him from the area which was on fire, he refused to let them do so, saying in words to the effect, "Leave me alone. I'm done for. Get out of here before the magazines go up." End quote. Now let's take a moment here to remind ourselves, these guys had all woken up in a country that was at peace. They were serving in the cushiest duty station you could ever dream of. It was a lazy Sunday morning, and within a matter of moments, they are in a full-on life and death combat situation. There are many hundreds of stories of valor and courage and bravery from that day, far beyond these 14 we're talking about here tonight, and there is not one single story of sniveling cowardice. Somebody asks you why you should be proud to be an American, you tell them that. Chief Aviation Ordnanceman John W. Finn, Los Angeles, California, quote, "For extraordinary heroism, distinguished service, and devotion above and beyond the call of duty, during the first attack by Japanese airplanes on the Naval Air Station Kaneohe Bay, territory of Hawaii on 7 December 1941, he promptly secured and manned a .50 caliber machine gun mounted on an instruction stand in a completely exposed section of the parking ramp, which was under heavy enemy machine gun strafing fire. Although painfully wounded many times, he continued to man this gun and to return the enemy's fire vigorously and with telling effect throughout the enemy strafing and bombing attacks, and with complete disregard for his own personal safety. It was only by specific orders that he was persuaded to leave his post to seek medical attention. Following first aid treatment, although obviously suffering much pain and moving with great difficulty, he returned to the squadron area and actively supervised the rearming of returning planes. His extraordinary heroism and conduct in this action are to be considered to be in keeping with the highest traditions of the naval service." End quote. And John Finn was not only the last surviving man on this list, he was also the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the entire Second World War, passing away at the age of 100 back in 2010, not far from here in Chula Vista, California, and he was one of those local dignitaries whom you would see at every civic function, proudly wearing his Pearl Harbor Survivors garrison cap, and even wore his Medal of Honor on special occasions. Chief Boatswain Edwin J Hill, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, quote, "For distinguished conduct in the line of his profession, extraordinary courage, and disregard of his own safety during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. During the height of the strafing and bombing, Chief Boatswain Hill led his men of the line handling details of the USS Nevada to the Keys, cast off the lines, and swam back to his ship. Later, while on the forecastle, attempting to let go of the anchors, he was blown overboard and killed by the explosion of several bombs." End quote. Now, as the chief boatswain, this guy has responsibility for all the mooring lines, all the anchors, all the associated paraphernalia. Now, since Nevada is the only ship on Battleship Row that doesn't have another vessel moored beside or alongside her, she is at liberty to raise steam and get underway without any other vessel having to do anything, except, shit, we are still moored to the dock, and all the dock guys have gone and run for their lives. So Chief Hill, just like the Citation says, he assembles a few of his guys, and they literally dive off the deck of the battleship and swim over to the dockside so they can release the mooring lines. And then they swim back to the ship that is still being actively strafed and bombed and torpedoed. Chief Machinist Donald K. Ross, Beverly, Kansas, quote, "For distinguished conduct in the line of his profession, extraordinary courage, and disregard of his own life during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. When his station in the forward dynamo room of the USS Nevada became almost untenable due to smoke, steam, and heat, Machinist Ross forced his men to leave that station and performed all the duties himself until blinded and unconscious. Upon being rescued and resuscitated, he returned and secured the forward dynamo room and proceeded to the after dynamo room, where he was later again rendered unconscious by exhaustion. Again recovering consciousness, he returned to his station where he remained until directed to abandon it." End quote. Don Ross passed away in 1992 at the age of 81, and his ashes were scattered over the wreck site of the Nevada near Bikini Atoll, where it lies after having been used as a target ship in the atomic bomb test known as Operation Crossroads. Chief Radioman Thomas J. Reeves, Thomaston, Connecticut, quote, for distinguished conduct in the line of his profession, extraordinary courage, and disregard of his own safety during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. After the mechanized ammunition hoists were put out of action in the USS California, Reeves, on his own initiative, in a burning passageway, assisted in the maintenance of an ammunition supply by hand to the anti-aircraft guns until he was overcome by smoke and fire, which resulted in his death. End quote. Now, the ship, it's been torpedoed twice by this point and sustained an untold number of bomb hits. She's taking on huge amounts of water, so the power goes out. And with it, the ability of the ammunition hoists to bring the ammo from the magazine up to the AA guns. So Reeves, who is a radio operator and doesn't know jack shit about guns or ammo, he takes it upon himself to organize a detail and quickly rigs up a rope and pulley sort of deal so the gun crews can continue throwing lead downrange. He continues working on this until he falls down and dies. Chief Water Tender Peter Tomic, out of Ljubiski Province, Bosnia and Herzegovina, quote, for distinguished conduct in the line of his profession and extraordinary courage and disregard of his own safety during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor by the Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. Although realizing that the ship was capsizing as a result of enemy bombing and torpedoing, Tomic remained at his post in the engineering plant of the USS Utah until he saw that all boilers were secured and all fire room personnel had left their stations, and by doing so lost his own life. Close quote. And here is a good reminder that not all American war heroes are American-born or even U.S. citizens. When Peter Tomic was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, he had no relatives in the country to receive it. So it remained in the possession of the U.S. government until 2006, when it was presented to his family aboard USS Enterprise off the coast of his home city, which is now part of Croatia. Machinist Mate First Class Robert R. Scott, Massillon, Ohio. Quote, for conspicuous devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and complete disregard of his own life above and beyond the call of duty during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. The compartment in the USS California in which the air compressor to which Scott was assigned as his battle station was flooded as the result of a torpedo hit. The remainder of the personnel evacuated that compartment, but Scott refused to leave, saying words to the effect of, "This is my station, and I will stay and give them air as long as the guns are going." End quote. There you have it. It's as simple as moral calculus gets. As long as my boys are up there throwing fucking lead downrange at the enemy, I will be down here making damn sure they can throw it. Seaman First Class James R. Ward, Springfield, Ohio. Quote, for conspicuous devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and complete disregard of his life above and beyond the call of duty during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. When it was seen that the USS Oklahoma was going to capsize and the order was given to abandon ship, Ward remained in a turret holding a flashlight so the remainder of the turret crew could see to escape, thereby sacrificing his own life. End quote. Another kid with a flashlight who decided helping a gun crew escape to safety was more important than living out the rest of his own life. Gunner's Mate Jackson C. Ferris, Columbus, Georgia. Quote, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while attached to the USS California during the surprise Japanese aerial attack on Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii, 7 December 1941. In charge of the ordnance repair party on the third deck when the first Japanese torpedo struck directly under his station, Gunner Ferris was stunned and severely injured by the concussion which hurled him to the overhead and back to the deck. Quickly recovering, he acted on his own initiative to set up a hand supply ammunition train for the anti-aircraft guns. With water and oil rushing in where the port bulkhead had been torn up from the deck, with many of the remaining crew members overcome by oil fumes and the ship without power and listing heavily to port as a result of the second torpedo hit, Gunner Ferris ordered the ship fitters to counterflood. Twice rendered unconscious by the nauseous fumes and handicapped by his painful injuries, he persisted in his desperate efforts to speed up the supply of ammunition and at the same time repeatedly risked his life to enter flooding compartments and drag to safety unconscious shipmates who were gradually being submerged in oil. By his inspiring leadership, his valiant efforts, and his extreme loyalty to his ship and her crew, he saved many of his shipmates from death and was largely responsible for keeping the California in action during the attack. His heroic conduct throughout this first eventful engagement of World War II reflects the highest credit upon Gunner Ferris and enhances the finest traditions of the U.S. Naval Service, end quote. This is the best of all these citations. It speaks for itself, so I'm glad I adopted an ordering scheme where that came as the last one. I think that all worked out rather well. In closing tonight, I just want to say this. How about let's not let Pearl Harbor Day perish from the earth and recede from the public consciousness? How about let's keep honoring it just as faithfully as we did when the survivors were still among us? We can do it. We just have to want to. Thank you very much for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. God bless the United States of America. Good night.